Good evening and welcome to Talk of the Stacks. I'm Christy Pearson with Friends of the Hennepin County Library. Thank you so much for joining us as we continue with our 2024 season. Now, I'd like to begin first by recognizing our wonderful sponsors who help make this free series possible. Many thanks to Ice House, LSE Architects, and the Star Tribune. Tonight, we are thrilled to have with us the remarkable Rumaan Alam, author of the new novel Entitlement. But first, I would like to remind you of a very special event that is happening in November in Minnesota, and that is Give to the Max Day. Now, if you've checked out a new bestseller or brought your child to drop in homework help tutoring, or perhaps attended an engaging library event or book club, you know just how lucky we are to have Hennepin County Library as a resource in our neighborhoods. I encourage you to remember our library's impact during this year's Give to the Max Day. We are looking for 1,000 donors between November 1st and November 21st to help us unlock a $30,000 matching gift. Your donation in any amount will help us reach that goal. So thank you so much for your consideration. And now it is my pleasure to welcome Library Director Scott Dimstra. Earlier this month, Scott completed two exciting milestones: his first Twin Cities Marathon and his first year of service as our Library Director. Welcome back to Talk of the Stacks, Scott, and congratulations.
Thanks, Christy. I'm thrilled to join our local readers and library patrons for another incredible author talk. As Christy mentioned, I've completed my first marathon, and I might be experiencing some technical difficulties where you can hear my voice, but you might not see my mouth moving. It might be technical difficulties. It might be my voice has not caught up to my body because I was in a lot of pain. But it's also, as Christy mentioned, I completed my first year as library director for Hennepin County Library. My time as library director has been both inspiring and rewarding. Within the past year, we've had 522,000 active cardholders, 9.3 million checkouts, 3 million in-person visits in our libraries. And education, as they say, is a marathon and not a sprint. And the support we give to students is truly inspiring. More than 9,000 homework help tutoring sessions are now available at 18 of our libraries. This year, our Let's Read program is in its pilot year, where we had 800 one-on-one sessions with 123 students, and we're expanding the tutoring program to from six libraries to 8 this year. If these stories and statistics matter to you, I encourage you to heed Christy's call and support the library you love with a gift to the Max Gifts this November. Your contributions joined together will make an incredible impact on the lives of your friends and neighbors. And now it is my pleasure to introduce this evening's guest. Tonight's moderator, Lisa Jones, is a culture coach, thought leader, and host of the podcast Black Market Reads, now in its 9th season. Jones also serves as the interim executive director for the Givens Foundation for African American Literature. Our guest of honor, Rumaan Alam, is a critically acclaimed novelist and writer. He's perhaps best known for his New York Times bestseller, Leave the World Behind, which was a finalist for the National Book Award and was made into a major motion picture starring Mahershala Ali and Julia Roberts. Alam's latest page-turning take on contemporary morality, Entitlement, was released in September to rave reviews. Called a brilliant exploration of extreme wealth and how it bends the lives of those close to it by the Boston Globe, local legend Louise Erdrich also advised that the book should come with an undertow warning. It is my great pleasure to welcome moderator Lisa Jones and guest of honor Rumaan Alam to Talk of the Stacks.
Thank you, Scott. And Rumaan, welcome to Talk of the Stacks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm delighted you're
although
here.
I'm disappointed to not be in person in Hennepin County, a place that I spent a lot of time in a previous lifetime, a beautiful part of the country. But I'm thrilled to be here with you today.
Well, how kind of you to know this part of the country and to acknowledge it. It's fall here and it's beautiful. Let's
It's kind of crazy, yeah. But before we start, can you pronounce your name for me so I make sure I'm saying it right? Lissa or Lisa?
thank you. You are very kind. It is Lissa.
Lissa. Okay, got it. I'm ready.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Rumaan. Thank you so much. First of all, for those people who are not lucky enough like me to have been able to read the book, will you give us a little sneak peek into what it's about?
Yes, although I will caution you and say this is like always a painful thing I feel like to ask writers to do the elevator pitch. But yes, I will, because I've practiced a lot. Entitlement is a novel set in 2014 in New York City about a young Black woman. She's 33. Young is a relative term, but she's young to me. She's a 33-year-old woman who has kind of had a she's had a rough start professionally. She sort of failed at a career as a teacher, and she takes a job at a private family foundation run by an octogenarian paper goods billionaire, office supply billionaire named Asher Jaffe. And his family foundation is devoted to giving away his significant fortune before his death, which he's 83, is looming. And the book explores the relationship between these two people, boss and employee, mentor and protege. But there's some other kind of connection between these two characters, and they share a connection to this abstract thing, which is money. So it's really a book, in my opinion, about money and the role of money in contemporary
Thank you. I hope that that'll be the last elevator
life.
speech you need to give. I was intrigued by the title Entitlement. It's such a compelling title. You know, what inspired it and how do you see the concept playing out in the book's characters and in their world?
Thank you. It's an astute question because it was a very difficult title to land on. Um, for a long time, this book was actually called Just Ask, which is ask is a nice word. It's a nice word, and it's a familiar word in development and in marketing as well. Like we talk about, or one talks about, if you're sort of writing a fundraising email, you discuss like what is the ask and how clear is the ask. The ask is what our friends from the Hennepin County Library did prior to this session. They established that this is what the library does, and we are asking for your financial support. That is the ask. And as an aside, everyone who is listening should just send the library $5. You'll feel great about it. Homework help. Like, what could be better? So ask had this sort of sound that I thought was really beautiful and spoke to what the book is somewhat about, which is philanthropy, charity, development, and how those are contingent on requesting support from one person to another. Entitlement is a funny word that is related to this question of asking, because one who asks can either be kind of humble or can be entitled. There are two modes of engaging in this request for something, for money, let's say. Entitlement in this culture, I think, especially in a post-Me Too, and I'm talking to a Minneapolis crowd, it's sort of like a liberal mindset. Entitlement is sort of generally understood, I think, as a bad thing, right? If you described someone's behavior as entitled, you would be saying it puts you off, right? It's sort of synonymous almost with privileged, right? But I also think entitlement cuts two ways, because synonyms for entitlement, depending on how they're deployed, can be used almost admirably. If you described a young man as entitled, you would be saying one thing. If you described him as ambitious, you'd be saying something else, something right next door to that. And so I was very interested in the sort of push and pull between what entitlement, the ways in which it sounds like a negative. And there's another sort of layer to the title that I quite like, which is that in this culture, I don't know if this is true in Europe and other and in other systems of government, but entitlement is also the language we use for welfare policy. We talk about entitlements, which is a fascinating term of art applied linguistically, because it would seem to suggest that the state itself is acknowledging that its citizens are entitled by virtue of citizenship or by virtue of humanity to food or to shelter. Those are sort of the principal ones. Anyone who's paying attention to this country's politics knows that even if the state says that we are entitled to those two things, rarely do we make good on those two promises to our neighbors with the least access to those things. So I felt like there was a lot of sort of fun. I'm wary of a novel with a single word as a title, but I liked that this title held all of this other kind of connotation.
I am so grateful to be here because I mean that complexity, I could hold some of it, but I didn't know all of it. And so thank you. That's so interesting to me. Thank you. You know,
Sure.
did you have in mind any kind of emotional or intellectual journey you wanted people to experience when they're reading your book? Was that was that an intent?
Yes, sure. I mean, that's what a novel is, right? To me, that is what a novel is. It's like a private system of accessing journey, right? Like that's why we read. I mean, anyone who's here tonight is a reader, right? And this is why you pick up a book, is to get onto a different kind of ride. Sometimes you're lying on the beach and you want the ride to be, the ride that like Emily Henry is going to take you on, and it's going to feel pleasant, and you're going to feel like flush and happy, and sometimes you have you're in a different mindset and you want the ride that Stephen King is going to take you on, and you want this kind of provocation or fear or that sort of quickening of the heart. I wanted this book to place you not in the protagonist's shoes, because I don't know that any of us could be there, but I wanted it to feel like a trick, that you're watching this young woman interrogate the role of money in her life. And hopefully by the end of the ride that I take you on, you will ask yourself questions about the role of money in your own life.
Mission accomplished.
Oh God. You waited a second and I was like, oh God, did I do it or did I not do it?
Trying to stay muted for the recording, so it's all about you. Thank you. Race, place, class, gender. What's it all got to do with it?
I think that in this cultural moment, there's a lot of well-meaning sensitivity about depictions that stray from authorial experience, right? This is a complicated issue, so bear with my mangled explanation of this. I'm not a Black woman. This is a novel about a Black woman and her experience with an old white man. I'm also not an old white man, although I'm getting up there, as you can see by the white in the beard. If you want to write a story about contemporary life and you only have access to the self, that makes it very difficult. It's like making a painting when you only have access to 3 colors. And I wanted to really be able to write a novel that I think pulls on things that are very important in contemporary life, such as you just said, race and place and the politics of the immediate past, because the book is set in 2014. But we, in 2024, live in conditions that were determined in 2014, of course. To write a book about money, I mean, I could have done it. I could have done it to write a book about money using only myself and what I know. But I didn't want to. I wanted to do something more probing and more, I was going to say risky, but I don't even know if it's that risky, because I think readers understand that the difference, like, I think readers understand good faith and attempts to write outside of authorial perspective. That's my hope. If I were going to write a novel with a Black woman at its heart, to demean Black womanhood, first of all, that would be an insane waste of time because it takes years to write a novel and I could simply just make a sign and hold that up, right? And second of all, that would be so toxic and evident. And that isn't the endeavor of the book. And hopefully readers will understand that at the outset and then be willing to sort of think about the questions the book is raising, even if it doesn't seem as though I can claim that territory personally. But it's a tricky balance. But I think if you're writing about contemporary American life and you're ignoring race or class or money or place or our recent politics, then you aren't fully doing the job of the novelist.
It's so refreshing to hear you say that because, I mean, I was thinking to myself, how did this person get in the head of a Black woman so well that I can intuit? How did you do that?
I think my answer to this is that, and I guess even the question kind of hints at what the problem is, or the strictures of too much sensitivity about these questions, because there is of course no monolithic experience of Black femininity any more than there is a monolithic experience of white masculinity. And so the notion that I would have had to like do some deep research into, are there aspects of Black womanhood, especially in America, that I can't comprehend? Of course there are, absolutely. And some of them are going to be as superficial or as obvious or surface level as like, beauty and beauty standards. And some of them are going to be much more complicated and that I'm not going to have access to. Is it the role of the artist to fixate on what their imagination cannot do? Or is it the challenge to sort of do what it can, to conjure a psyche? And I think it's the latter. And I hope that, a novel can only ever kind of feel real, but it will never be real. And the hero of this book is a pretty flawed, she makes some bad choices. She makes some poor choices. But that, to me, is a kind of liberty for her and for a depiction of Blackness on the page that she is, I hope, feels as like complicated and fully human as like all of us are, right? Like all of us make bad choices. So I'm glad that you felt there was some verisimilitude or some recognition of like psyche, because that's the job of the writer, is to conjure psyche. And on some fundamental level, I don't think the psyche of a Black woman is so different from the psyche of me or anyone else, because we're all just kind of psyches,
I love that we are all common psyches. And I do really think that that's what it is. I mean, because it transcends all the other things that you're writing about that we can feel. Did any real life events or personal experiences influence the themes or characters in the book?
So one of my earliest readers in my work is my husband. And when I gave him this book and my last book also, he said the same thing, which is like, oh, this is just you. This is, and I said like, well, who is me? And he was like, no, every person in this book is just you. And I think that's kind of astute, because that's all a writer really has access to. You have your imagination, but you're sort of trapped here. You're trapped in this. At the same time, I would say, I think it's meaningless, because the private things that I have collected and reshaped and turned into this kind of fiction, it doesn't enrich, or it wouldn't enrich your experience of the book to know. It's only my husband, who knows me, who is witness to like the last 20 years of my life, who can say like, oh yes, I understand that these things have happened to you, or I understand where the germ of this idea came from in your own personal experience. But the goal is to kind of, it's like, you know, these are just like snowflakes of experience, but the goal is to mold them into the snowball that I smacked the reader in the face with. How is that for a metaphor?
Perfect, quite honestly. As a reader, perfect. Talk a little bit. Thank you, Rumaan. Let's talk about your writing process and craft. Is that okay?
Of course. I mean,
All right,
it's
let's
your
go.
interview, Alyssa. It's your interview. So,
Well, this is all about you, Beauty. I just am curious and I want to know. What was your writing process like for Entitlement? Was it different? Was it similar to your other experiences with your writing?
it was quite different actually, because I mean, frankly, and this is sort of a great theme. This is a thematically interesting point. It was different because I had money at my back. I was undertaking the writing of this book on the heels of a book that was commercially successful. And so this book is the first one I've written in my career, which I published my first book in 2016, but I was writing it in 2014 and 15. So this was the first time in a decade in which that sort of private act of writing was something I could understand as my job. And I could go to my office and sit down at, 9 o'clock, whenever the kids were off at school finally, and sit down and work all day at this task, and not need to worry, as so many of us do, and as I did for a long time prior, about like how I'm going to pay the babysitter, how I'm going to pay the health insurance, how I'm going to, manage the save up for summer camp, and I had a great experience of that even in the prior decades. I was working as an adjunct, I was working in advertising. There are many ways I was able to cobble together a living. But the liberty of this particular process is that I could write as though it were my job, because it was my job. And so I wrote this book much as it was kind of like if I had a 9 to 5 job. I went to my desk, I sat down and I worked all day, and then I clocked out in the evening and went home and lived the rest of my life. And so that I think that alone really reshaped how the process was for me.
That is such an enlightening, that's such a huge piece that you're writing about her liberty as you are able to have liberty for the first time because
Yeah.
of money. And she
Yeah.
had some liberty because this is wonderful. Thank you. I mean, this is outstanding. How do you end up developing your characters? They seem like human beings, deeply flawed and deeply relatable at the same time. How do you do that?
There is a conversation among contemporary readers. If any of the librarians are listening, I think they will understand this. There's a way in which readers now seem to want to read about people who are likable. We use this word a lot, likable. And that is something that is not of interest to me. Because to me, that feels at odds with human. No one is really that likable. One's own children are not that likable. And that is sort of like what is interesting about people, is the ways in which they can veer between these extremes. I have a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old now. And let me tell you, you're not that likable in this particular window of age. You're like, of course, like one hopes that your parents, and God bless like middle school teachers, that you're like, there are adults who are devoted to you and understand that your likability is sort of like at a low in this particular period of development. And it's funny too, because then you as an adult are like, God, what did I do to my parents in this period of time? But in terms of like establishing the accuracy of a person on the page, likability is not an interesting metric to me. What is more interesting is the ways in which people do strange, unpredictable, weird things. People take odd risks. They use magical thinking. We all do this. We all do it constantly. I mean, I could give you a million examples. There's just a million ways in which people are not that rational, are not that logical, make strange choices. And that to me is of great interest in a fiction. I often think about it for myself. Um, when I'm writing a book, I make an outline. It's a very vague outline. And the cheat is that I make a new outline on each draft because I acknowledge that the book has shifted under my feet. And I get to these places in the book and I can identify them in Entitlement. And I think, oh, what the character needs to do is like turn left. Like she keeps moving forward, but actually what a person would do is turn left. They would do something wrong, or they would do something strange, or they would do something unpredictable. And so that is of great interest to me. And I also think that, you know, you learn over time what your own predilections or your own shortcuts to establishing character, and you know what you're interested in and what you're not interested in. I am not interested in what people look like. And in fact, in none of my work do I really ever describe what someone looks like because I can never really apply language to it. I am, however, very interested in food. And so often when I'm writing about a person, I spend a lot of time thinking like, what would they eat? Like what is delicious to them? Or what would they drink? And what would that be like? There's a scene in Entitlement where Brooke, the protagonist, is having a moment of sort of private indulgence. And I had a lot of fun thinking about what she would eat and drink in that moment of like private indulgence. She drinks a chocolate coffee, which to me is like so gross, but also maybe good. Like maybe if I were really in the mood to just be like, I want to treat myself, I'm gonna have a chocolate coffee. Like that, I get it. Like it helped me understand her in a way that is much more interesting to me than describing how her hair looks or the color of her skin or, you know, the whiteness of her teeth or her physical stature.
I really appreciate that because it allows you to connect to the experience of the character without worrying about the exterior, which if we worried less about exterior, how that might
Well, I mean, this is a very American problem, isn't it? And you know, it is, yeah, and it's not, and it's complex because it's not that it's deeply significant that the protagonist of this book is a Black woman. It's like a very it's obviously a very specific choice that I've made. But if I spent the time or the reader's time metaphorizing that or describing it or talking about her, you know, her skin tone or whatever, doing all of these other sort of acrobatics that a lot of the worst fiction does, it's just not of interest to me to talk about like what precisely what color her skin is. You know, it's not salient to the project of this book. It was more interesting to me to help you, as you said, like I do want the reader to feel a bit like they're inside of her and never really able to understand her because crucially, I don't think we do that with other people. I think other people remain elusive over time, and that's what's interesting about them. And so I like that in the character on the page as well, that you feel like you've been with them, you spent 300 pages with them, you know they liked this chocolate coffee when they're hungover, but you don't really understand them.
And that is so true. That is, nor do we necessarily take the time you really to understand others. Yes, I completely agree. Audience, if you are as curious as I am to ask as many questions as you can cram into this time, I want to do it. Please drop them in the Q&A section of the chat or there, use the Q&A button. And Rumaan, this is just fascinating. Thank you. Your work often merges literary fiction with elements of suspense and social critique. That was sort of my read on it. That may not be correct, so please correct me if I'm wrong. How do you balance those different tones and sort of in genres in your writing? It's complex.
No, I don't. Thank you. I don't think you're wrong. I think that this book and its predecessor share an interest in a kind of atmosphere of menace. Um, and I should say, and I think this is sort of like so crucial, especially if there are writers in the room tonight. It came from reading. It came from reading. Um, I think the writer, but maybe every artist, visual art, maybe this is true for visual art, you're distilling what you are taking in. And so I have been very interested in the last decade or so in books with a sense of mystery, a sense of atmosphere, a sense of fright, and in using that to my own ends, because I like Stephen King, right? Like, I like a good, creepy domestic thriller, like I love that kind of work. And I think what's remarkable about it is the ways in which a writer can elicit an almost physical response in her reader, right? Across this vast distance of time, right? Like, you could give a 17-year-old now a copy of Gone Girl, right? A book that's like a decade old, and they could have this experience across time, so far removed from when Gillian Flynn devised that book, of like this sort of strong, powerful response to a story, which is incredible to me. And it is something that literary fiction, which is also a genre and really is sort of recognizably the genre of to which my books belong, doesn't always exploit the potential of language to do that to a reader, to make you feel unsettled. And to the last part of your question, is it difficult? It's not that it's difficult, it's that it's the only thing you can do, right? Like, the writer only has the tool of language. It's the only tool you have, and it's all inside of the language. So in Entitlement, I wanted the book to feel stultifying, so I set it in the summer. I wanted the book to feel overwhelming, so I talked a lot about like this incredible heat of the summer. I wanted it to feel like creepy, and so there's some creeping figures in the narrative. All of this is sort of can be accomplished using only language, and it's the same, and in a way, it's like it's no different than the tools that like Judy Blume uses to establish like how childhood feels, or that Dr. Seuss uses to establish sort of like the zaniness of his fictional universe. It's like it's the only tool you have. It's really more about identifying what your objective is.
Sometimes you're engaging me so much, I forget that I'm on my duty. I've got to get on my job. I've got to get back on it. Thank you, Rumaan. This is wonderful. I think about the way that when you're thinking about a book, what are the conversations you hope people will have as a result of reading Entitlement? Like, what do you hope we talk about?
I mean, to me, the central endeavor of the book is to look at the role of money in contemporary life. The only thing I can really, the book is nudging its reader toward an experience, not toward a revelation, because I don't have that revelation. I don't have the answer. I only have the question, unfortunately. I only have the question. But that's what fiction is. Fiction is a system of asking you questions and then declining to answer them. And it puts the onus back on the reader. And that maybe that's true of all art. Like, that is my favorite thing. When you go to a museum, oh my God, Minneapolis has like two of the best museums in the country. I went to the MIA the last time I was in Minneapolis, and there's this incredible, I'm pretty sure it's there, this Robert Colescott painting of the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. Incredible painting, masterpiece, an American genius, Robert Colescott, masterpiece of a painting. And you look at it and you think you understand what you're seeing, because the title is telling you what you're seeing. The title is telling you you're seeing Sirhan Sirhan assassinate Robert F. Kennedy in the Ambassador Hotel. But that's not really what you're seeing, because you're not looking at a photograph. You're looking at this sort of cartoon, and you're wondering, like, why are some of these people Black in this depiction? What is exactly happening? And the painter is not there to tell you. The curators are there to tell you something about the painting, but even that isn't really enough. And if you're lucky to be there with a friend, you stop there for 2 seconds and you say, well, what is going on here? And you have this conversation and you carry, it sits in your head, but it's unresolvable. You know, it's something your mind kind of wants to work over it, but it's never really, you're not going to get anywhere. But that's the pleasure of it. You know, it's not like art is not a pop quiz. You know, it's just not how it works.
I'm having a ball. I hope you're having as much fun as I am, because I am learning. I wish I could be taking notes, but I'm glad they're recording this so I can go back. I think it's magical. Thank you
Thank
so much.
you.
I'm learning so much. What do you think is something you might have discovered about yourself, either as a person or a writer, while you were working on Entitlement?
I discovered the parameters of my own patience because this was a very difficult book to write. And I discovered that unfortunately, there's a limit to, I said this to a friend. I was recently talking to a friend who's a novelist. And I said to her of the book I'm just about to start writing, I said, well, surely on my fifth book, I will have figured something out and I will know how to begin at the right place so that my work is, so that the road will be easier. And she very kindly kind of laughed at this and was like, no, no, no. Each time it's a different road. Like you'll never actually learn anything useful. Like it's always the same negotiation. And I think that unfortunately she's right. I think if you are at a place artistically where you feel like you already have the answers, then perhaps the challenge is not worth pursuing. So this book in particular, even despite the conditions which I described earlier as one of liberty, right? If you are in a place in this culture where you are not worried about how you're going to pay the health insurance, that is like such a great privilege, right? Like I began this book from that place of this incredible privilege and thought that I would therefore have this sort of easy time negotiating with the text because those other worries were less present. But it shows what I know. You know, so I think that is what I discovered is that like the work is challenging and that I ran out of patience and I got to like a pretty low point toward the end of the process. And I just thought like, I can't finish this book. Like I can't make this book work. And, you know, you're fortunate in contemporary life if you have another person, a spouse, a friend, a colleague who can say to you like, you can do this. You need to like take 11 days off and like be gentle, but then come back to the right. Like, and my husband really did that. He's a real gem, that guy. But he really did say like, you're gonna do it. You just have to like let yourself do it and stop thinking about arbitrary timelines and stop thinking about the morass of the larger task as something you can just sort of fit into a bunch of to-dos. It doesn't work that way. And that was very helpful. It was very helpful. But yeah, well, I'm just telling you that I discovered I'm impatient. I'm impatient. That's what I discovered.
I'm your sister. Let it be known. Let it be known for posterity's sake. I so appreciate that. What's next for you? You know, are you writing? You know, you said you're about to start another book. You know,
Yeah.
what are you doing?
Yeah. I mean, at the moment, what I feel like I'm doing is healing. I do think that the enterprise of a novel is, for me anyway, like a big one. It's a big one. It's big and complicated and takes a really long time. And there's a process by which I have to like shed the voice of the book and the people inside of the book. Because these people, Brooke and Asher, her billionaire boss, they are not real. And that's very important to me that we understand that about fiction. It's imagined. But they become, in the 2 years that I'm working on a book, the filter for a lot of my reality. So I will be in my normal life with my family at a restaurant, and something at another table will make me think of these people who don't exist, right? And it's kind of that borders on a kind of madness. Like what I'm describing is like it's a little irrational. And I know that. And I understand that it's sort of related to the task I'm engaged in all day, right? If you were a cartographer for your job and you were out eating pasta and looked at your plate and were like, oh, these noodles kind of remind me of the borders of, Brazil, right? Like that's what you're gonna see. You're gonna see the task that you're immersed in. And in order to write another book, I need to emerge from this one and sort of like leave all of this stuff behind. Um, but fortunately for me, the way in which I do that is really fun. I read, principally. I read other books. I don't really write. I try to hear music. I try to see films. I go to the museum. I try to have a kind of experience in the world that's not about producing something, but it's about absorbing something. And I love that. That's like it's so fun. It's so fun. And I've been traveling a lot in support of this book, and pretty much anywhere you go, there is a museum. And it's really fun to go to a museum in a place where you have not been and are not likely to go back to, right? So you can just sort of run in and have like a private experience for 45 minutes. I was in London. The National Gallery in London is astonishing. As we all know, the English really stole all of this stuff the world over. They had great taste, though. You can go to the National Gallery in London and see this Hans Holbein painting, The Ambassadors, one of the most astonishing paintings in Western art. And it's just there for you to look at. And to have this sort of 2-minute experience with is so enriching in some way I can't predict, I think, when I finally do get back to work. But I will go back to work in January. I will sit down at my computer and get at it.
Well, I love that you have designed a way to start healing, a way that you can transition from the other to the
Yeah,
new.
thank you.
It's really important. And I consider it an act of resistance to not succumb to the myth of production all the time.
That is very interesting because that really is an American problem, possibly, or maybe a contemporary problem, where we constantly feel like we have to make something or produce something or even just demonstrate something, right? Like how often am I at the museum? Just what I was just telling you, I was in the National Gallery and I felt some impulse to like photograph everything with my phone as to demonstrate that I had been there, to prove that I had had an experience, as though the experience were invalid without it being documented or proven. It's a conundrum. It's like a strange part of contemporary life. But it's useful to remember what you just said. Like you don't have to make something all the time. And you also don't have to make something. Another thing, and I speak to a lot of writers at events like this who talk, depending on where they are in their career, they talk about publishing in particular as the thing that will validate what they are doing. And I understand why they say that, but I also feel like it's incorrect. You can be a writer without writing something for consumption. Like they're sort of two different, they're related, but they're different. And I'm actually excited to have these next few months inside of the part of me that is a writer who is not writing something, you know?
I am so celebrating that for you. And as excited as I am that we have an audience, it's time for me to transition, even though I don't want to. I have so many more questions. But nonetheless, I can't digress. We'll go to the audience Q&A. Thank you to the audience members who've been so engaged. I'm so excited to ask Rumaan your questions. Rumaan, how did you research the world of philanthropy for the book Entitlement? Any historical anecdotes that affected your writing process?
Yeah, what's funny about philanthropy is that like it's such a part of contemporary life that in a way I didn't have to do very much research. Um, if you have attended a private college, you've been the recipient of that ask, right? Like you've got the letter in the mail that says like, hey, I know you paid us $120,000 a couple years ago to go here, but now we're back and we want some more money. If you go to a hospital in any city and you see the names of the individuals on the wings, right? You go to an art museum. It is an ambient part of contemporary life that philanthropy has sort of allowed for a lot of civic life. I did read a book that I think a lot of people in this room may have read called Empire of Pain, a really fascinating book about the Sackler family and their philanthropy and the ways in which their philanthropy may be related to a sense of guilt over how they amassed their fortune. But again, I think these are things that we kind of understand as people. Philanthropy is a really interesting thing to me. I think it's too complex to say simply that it's a good or a bad. Someone like Bill Gates has devoted considerable effort to ridding the world of malaria. That is an extraordinary accomplishment. Then there are charitable organizations that are engaged in projects that I think are directly at odds with the principles of the country. So philanthropy can be very broadly defined, and it sort of depends on your politics. It's sort of in the eye of the beholder. Is it a good thing that Bill Gates cured malaria or at least allowed really smart people to do it? Absolutely, no question. Could we imagine a society in which the state solved those problems? I could, I mean, we did just live through COVID-19, right? Like I could imagine that world. But again, happily, the task of the novelist is to ask questions and not answer them.
I love that. Asked, but not answered.
Yeah.
Okay, I like that. I like that. Abigail's asking, can you comment on the experience of having your novel adapted for cinematic treatment? Did you participate in the writing of the film? And if not, did you desire to or not?
No, so my last book, Leave the World Behind, was made into a film by Sam Esmail, who is a writer as well as a director. So Sam wrote the script. And I didn't have a ton of desire to do that myself because it's so technical a form. It's so specific a form. Anyone who's had the experience of watching a movie and being like, this movie's not that good, their experience is really one of the script, right? Like there's a lot of onus on the writing on the page to make the whole thing work. And I just think Sam is such a gifted filmmaker and such a gifted writer that he would better know how to do that than I would. I have thought a lot about writing a screenplay, but I'm so interested in the novel as a form, and it is what brings me the greatest comfort. I love going to see movies, but when I'm here on vacation, when I'm sad, when I'm low, when I'm high, whatever, what I turn to is the novel. Like that is the thing that really, from age 8, right? Like from my first experience of reading Judy Blume, really, or Louise Fitzhugh. And I should just say, for the Hennepin County Library Association, that is what libraries do, right? Like they provide you at this sort of early age with this thing that you didn't even know you needed. And then that thing, the novel, can be your companion for decades,
You are so right. They did it for me. They did it for you.
Yeah.
I love it. I may mispronounce the last name. Can you tell us more about the role of your art in the writing of Entitlement? The Helen Frankenthaler?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Frankenthaler painting and the youth dance troupe in particular. How did you decide which art to include?
That's a great question. And the answer, which may or may not satisfy the person asking, is that I simply chose what I like. Helen Frankenthaler is an artist who I love, extraordinary abstract expressionist. There's when you see the work in person, you can see it in reproduction too, but when you see it in person, the depth of that color is so baffling. You're just like, I don't understand how she did this. It's extraordinary. And the dance troupe, the children's dance school, which is sort of a significant part of the novel, My own children, both of whom are Black, did attend a community dance school. They still have a relationship to this school of, the arts of the African diaspora. They learned when they were little, learned like African drumming and dance. And I was very interested in a territory of contemporary life that was removed from the question of money. And art is largely removed from the question of money, which is complicated because art is also, a Helen Frankenthaler, like the art market is an economic indicator. A Frankenthaler painting at this point costs millions of dollars. And, there's a way in which we can attach a price tag to everything, including the ways in which children learn how to dance, just as something to do to while away the hours on a long afternoon, which every parent needs. But I chose those forms with some deliberation because I had this personal feeling about them, and that they both felt to me so profound, I suppose, like that, like it's almost impossible to talk about money. When you have the experience of watching your 5-year-old dance on stage, you actually you can't think about money. Even if it costs you an arm and a leg to send them to that school and to buy the ballet shoes for her, whatever it is, it's not like it's in that moment, in that 3 minutes that they're dancing, you're free from this question of money, which is unfortunately like a real rarity in life.
How many people would lack high blood pressure or diabetes or many other things if it weren't for the pressure of the money? I hear you.
What would the divorce rate look like?
There you go. Stress levels. I'm with all of it. Jess asks, how much do you write for your reader versus writing for yourself as an artist? They write, does potential perception by the reader drastically affect how or what you write? Or do you create for yourself and leave it to the reader to interpret as they may?
I do. That is such an interesting question. I don't write for myself. If I do write I keep a journal. I write for myself. I have an experience of language that is only of interest to me and only for me. But the novel itself is not something I make for myself. It is something that belongs to someone else. And in fact, I would say it's inert until someone reads it. It doesn't actually exist until someone reads it. And I cannot dictate that reader's experience of it. And that's a really interesting thing to me. We all do this, right? You have your favorite books that mean something to you because you see them and understand them a certain way. And that way may diverge quite significantly from how the author designed it. But it doesn't matter because it doesn't belong to the author anymore. It belongs to you. And that is, again, sort of like what is so incredible about art is that like it's this fixed commodity, but it's also this private experience. And so your experience, one reader's experience of the book will always be theirs. And which is why we feel so personally about it. And when you tell your friend or your mother-in-law, you're like, oh, you gotta read 100 Years of Solitude. It blew my mind. And then later she's like, yeah, it was okay. It's why you get so mad. Because you're like, what? What do you mean it was okay? Like, did you not have the experience I had? But no one else can have that experience. It only belongs to you.
That's true. That is so deeply true. Even in a book club.
Yes, exactly. That's why book clubs are so fun, but it's also why you have to serve wine so that everybody sort of calms down a little bit.
Keep the peace. Do you write extensive backstories for your characters before you begin to write? Thank you, Nancy.
No, I don't. The only thing I do is I tried, well, yeah, I name them because I feel like the name holds a great deal. And I try to figure out, this will sound so silly to you, but it's true. I figure out the presidential administration during which they were born, because that also feels very key. It feels very significant because there's a lot of cultural association with the politics. So when you talk about Reagan, I feel like he as a person sums up a whole set of attitudes and cultural signifiers. So when I say, okay, this person was born when they were born, Reagan was the president, then in some part of my head, I'm like, okay, that gives me like Dallas and New Coke and, you know, glitzy dresses and like, you know, Tom Wolfe. It gives it sort of that's how I have a sense of cultural association. Um, and I'm often wrong. Like some of it gets fuzzy. Like when you go from like Reagan to the first Bush, you're like, wait a minute, what was happening? And like when was Murphy Brown on TV? Like it gets fuzzy, but it's helpful for establishing this sort of larger tone of who that character is. So that's all I do. Because I don't like a character to feel too legible to me. I like them to feel a little unreal, a little unfixed.
I love that. Okay, I cannot believe this. This time is flying. Okay, somebody wants to know, what books are you reading now? Any contemporary writers you think need to be on our radar?
Well, there are so many. I just finished Haruki Murakami has a new book coming out called The City and Its Uncertain Walls, which I just finished this afternoon, and now I'm reading Alan Hollinghurst's new book, Our Evenings. Um, oh God, this is like such a hard question. I think it depends. I mean, again, it's like what I like about Murakami, who's a writer who meant a lot to me when I was a younger person, and is not a writer I remained that interested in, but I was curious about this book, is the ways in which his novels defy logic, and they often resist any kind of closure. This is something that's very difficult for the contemporary taste, but he seems very able to get away with it. I like storytelling where the conclusion it feels baffling, or it feels just like, wait, what? I don't understand. I love a book that makes me feel like I haven't understood it, because it feels like the writer is respectful of me somehow. And another writer who I would mention, who I think is sort of like underread in this country, is the French writer Marie Ndiaye, who her last I'm actually blanking on the name of her last book, but I've read 3 of her books in the last year, and she wrote a book called That Time of Year, which is about a family that always takes the same summer holiday, and this one year they decide to stay on this holiday one day longer than normal, and there are these kind of extraordinary consequences of this very simple choice. She is a writer with incredible imagination and a kind of fierceness. There's a real ferocity to her work. And it can be read, I think that of the 3 novels that I read, they all feel like they are about one thing, but they are also about, she is a Black writer in France. So they are also like inescapably about the conditions of being this sort of French person who is Black. There's a fascinating complexity there. Really an extraordinary writer. Her last name is Ndaiye, Marie. Highly recommend. Oh, I lost you. I think you're muted still.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Rumaan Alam, you are the very best. This has been a marvelous interview.
Thank you.
A delightful read, and delightful not in the sense of it's not being heavy, but in the sense of I couldn't put it down from the time I got it. So I want to say thank you. Best wishes to you, and thank you so very much. To our audience, this is our author, Rumaan Alam, author of Entitlement. Please join the link in the chat to buy the book from Majors and Quinn, our independent booksellers. On behalf of the Friends of the Hennepin County Library, thank you so much and have a great night. Take good care, Rumaan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.